It was a late afternoon in a busy city, and the streets were alive with the usual hum of life. Cars honked as they moved slowly through traffic. People hurried along the sidewalks, some talking on their phones, others carrying shopping bags or briefcases. Among them walked a man who carried himself with calm confidence. He was dressed neatly in a dark suit, a tie carefully knotted, shoes polished to a subtle shine. His expression was relaxed, though his mind had been occupied with the meeting he had just left, one that had demanded his full attention and mental energy. He walked with purpose, the rhythm of his steps matching the beat of the city around him. He was a man who had dedicated his life to serving his country, working behind the scenes to advise leaders on decisions that affected millions. Today, though, he was simply a man trying to get home, hoping for a quiet end to a long day. The sun cast long shadows across the street, and the golden light glinted off the glass windows of nearby buildings, creating a calm, almost serene scene. But the calm would soon be broken in a way he could never have anticipated. On the same street, a police officer patrolled the area. He had been working a long shift, and the tension of the day weighed heavily on him. The city had seen incidents of unrest lately, and officers were on high alert. The officer's attention was keen, his senses tuned to every movement, every sound. He scanned the crowd, his eyes darting from one pedestrian to another. When he saw the man in the suit walking calmly, his eyes narrowed. There was no reason to suspect him, yet something about him triggered a response rooted in prejudice and fear. The officer stepped forward, his voice firm and commanding. "Hey you, stop right there." The man paused, looking over his shoulder, his calm demeanor unshaken. He raised his hand slightly, a universal gesture of compliance. "Yes, officer?" he asked, his voice steady and respectful. The officer approached cautiously but aggressively, his hand hovering near his utility belt. "What are you doing here? Where are you going?" he demanded. The man explained he had just come from a meeting and was on his way home, showing nothing but courtesy. He answered each question clearly, without hesitation, hoping to de-escalate the situation. But the officer was not convinced. His judgment was clouded by bias and a need to assert control. He perceived the man's calmness as suspicious, interpreting it as arrogance or defiance. Without any clear cause, he reached for his stun gun, an action fueled by fear and prejudice rather than evidence. "Don't move," he barked, and before the man could react further, the officer activated the stun gun. The sudden shock threw the man forward, his body stiffening as the current coursed through him. Pain shot through him, sharp and electrifying, and for a moment the bustling city seemed to fade away. Passers-by gasped, some froze in shock, while others instinctively pulled out their phones to record the incident. The officer maintained his stance, his own adrenaline surging, as he watched the man struggle briefly to regain control of his body. Despite the pain, the man did not retaliate. He maintained his composure, breathing through the shock, refusing to respond with anger or aggression. His training and his years of experience in high-pressure situations helped him remain grounded. He knew that any rash action could worsen the situation, and he chose restraint over confrontation. Bystanders began to murmur among themselves. "Why would he do that?" one woman whispered to her friend. "He didn't do anything," another exclaimed. The tension in the air grew as more people stopped to watch. Some tried to intervene verbally, asking the officer to calm down, while others simply recorded the unfolding drama, unsure of what might happen next. The city, usually indifferent to daily occurrences, had suddenly become a stage for a deeply unsettling moment. In the midst of the chaos, the man finally regained enough control to speak. "Please, officer, I am cooperating. I have done nothing wrong," he said, his voice calm but firm. There was no trace of threat in his tone, only a quiet insistence on dignity and respect. The officer hesitated, sensing that this was not an ordinary encounter. He noticed the man's identification, the subtle but unmistakable indication of his position and authority. Recognition dawned slowly, the realization hitting him like a cold wave. He had used excessive force on someone who held a high and respected position within the government. Shame and fear mingled in the officer's mind. The gravity of his mistake settled in, and he began to question his actions. Around them, the crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of anger, confusion, and sympathy. Social media users watching the live streams began to comment, their outrage spreading quickly. It was not just a local incident anymore. The world was watching. Meanwhile, the man steadied himself fully, taking deep, measured breaths. He straightened his suit, adjusted his tie, and addressed the officer again, this time with a quiet authority. "Sir, I trust you understand the situation now. Let us resolve this calmly." His words were measured, not accusatory, aimed at de-escalating further tension. He remained firm but respectful, setting an example of how to handle crisis with dignity. The officer lowered his stun gun, shaking slightly. He avoided direct eye contact, his mind racing with the possible consequences. The realization of how easily fear and bias had led him astray hit him hard. Around them, the crowd slowly began to disperse, though many remained, still recording, still talking, still processing the shocking scene they had just witnessed. The city continued to hum around them, but something intangible had shifted. People were more aware, more alert, and a conversation about bias, power, and accountability had already begun, even before the official statements were made. In that moment, the man understood the importance of his reaction. He had been humiliated, shocked, and physically harmed, yet he chose to act with calmness and restraint. It was a testament to his character, his training, and his commitment to making the world a better place through measured action. The incident, though painful and unjust, would not define him. It would reinforce the need for systemic change and the pursuit of justice. As the man walked away, escorted briefly by other officers who had arrived on the scene to assess the situation, the city seemed to hold its breath. This was a story that would not fade quickly. It was a reminder of the deep issues that still existed, of the importance of awareness and of the power of a single person to respond with dignity in the face of injustice. And though the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the city streets, the man's resolve remained bright, a quiet but firm light in a moment of darkness. After the shocking encounter, the city slowly resumed its rhythm, but the impact of what had just occurred lingered in the air like a heavy fog. The man walked steadily, flanked by officers who had arrived to manage the situation. Every step was deliberate, controlled, as if he were trying to put the event behind him while processing the layers of injustice he had just faced. The incident had not only caused physical pain, but had struck at the very core of his dignity. Yet he remained composed, a quiet calm that drew attention from everyone around him. It was not long before someone in the group noticed the identification the man carried, subtle card that denoted his position as an advisor to the president. It was not something that would be obvious to anyone casually observing. Yet in that moment, the weight of its significance became clear. The officers who had been escorting him shared brief, almost imperceptible looks with one another. Recognition sparked in their eyes. This was no ordinary civilian. This was someone whose words and actions had influence at the highest levels of government. The officer who had used the stun gun froze, his mind racing to grasp the reality of what he had done. Shame and fear collided inside him. The sudden realization that his own actions could ripple far beyond this street was overwhelming. He had acted out of bias, out of fear, out of assumptions that were entirely unfounded. Now he faced the immediate consequences of those split-second decisions. Around them, the bystanders who had witnessed the incident began to murmur, their voices rising in volume and urgency. Some were already typing rapidly on their phones, live streaming the events or sending short videos to social media platforms. The small crowd that had gathered was filled with astonishment, confusion, and a growing sense of injustice. People spoke in hushed tones, speculating about the man's identity, the reason for the excessive force, and what might happen next. The man, aware of the attention, maintained his composed demeanor. He knew that reacting with anger or shouting would not help the situation. He had faced challenges before, moments when diplomacy and patience were his most powerful tools. He carefully removed the identification card from his pocket, handing it to a senior officer nearby. "I believe this clarifies my position," he said calmly. The gesture was simple, but its impact was profound. Recognition dawned in the eyes of several officers, and a palpable shift in the atmosphere occurred. The officer who had committed the act felt a mixture of dread and disbelief. He had made a grave mistake, and he could not hide from it. His hands trembled slightly, and his voice, when he finally spoke, lacked its earlier authority. I didn't know. I didn't realize," he stammered. attempting to justify his actions in a way that felt hollow even to him. The words hung awkwardly in the air, offering no real comfort or explanation to anyone. Nearby, a group of witnesses debated what to do next. Some wanted to confront the officer directly, to demand an apology or accountability on the spot. Others understood the need for caution, recognizing that escalation could lead to more harm. Phones continued to record the scene, capturing every reaction, every whispered exchange, every look of uncertainty and fear. The man, though momentarily exhausted from the shock, remained focused. He knew that his response in these moments would set the tone for what followed. As word of the incident began to circulate through official channels, the implications grew more serious. In the office buildings nearby, employees began hearing murmurs, checking social media and trying to piece together what had happened. Journalists who were already monitoring social feeds picked up on the live videos, realizing quickly that this was no ordinary altercation. It involved a figure with considerable influence, and the potential ramifications were enormous. Inside the man's mind, a flurry of thoughts raced. He reflected on how easily prejudice and misunderstanding could escalate into violence. He considered the broader implications for the community, for the relationship between law enforcement and civilians, and for the trust that was essential to a functioning society. Despite the physical shock and pain, he remained committed to a measured response. He would not allow anger to dictate his actions. He would focus on fairness, justice, and systemic change. The officer who had acted rashly was guided to a quieter area, away from the growing crowd. Superiors arrived to assess the situation, and the gravity of the mistake began to settle over the police team. Conversations were tense, filled with questions, instructions, and reprimands. The officer's mind was clouded with worry, realizing that every action moving forward would be scrutinized. He was caught between the immediate human consequences and the looming professional and legal consequences. Back on the street, the man addressed the crowd that had formed, not with anger or blame, but with calm authority. He explained that he was unharmed and that he intended to work through the proper channels to ensure accountability. His words were measured, emphasizing understanding and the need to prevent similar incidents in the future. He highlighted that the core issue was not his personal experience alone, but the larger societal challenge of bias and misjudgment that could affect countless others. As reporters began to arrive, drawn by the viral videos and the buzz on social media, the man stayed composed. He spoke briefly to a few reporters, stressing the importance of restraint, dialogue, and reform. He avoided sensationalism, focusing instead on the human aspects of the incident: fear, misunderstanding, and the urgent need for training and awareness. His calm and principled approach drew attention, and the initial outrage began to be tempered by respect for his measured demeanor. Inside newsrooms and government offices, the story spread rapidly. Analysts and journalists debated the event's significance, considering both the racial bias evident in the officer's actions and the political implications of involving a high-ranking advisor. Social media users shared clips, expressed outrage, and discussed systemic issues with policing, sparking wider conversations about reform, accountability, and equity. Meanwhile, the officer continued to grapple with his conscience. He understood more clearly than ever the consequences of letting bias override judgment. He reflected on his training, his responsibilities, and the human cost of his actions. In private moments, he began to consider the need for change within himself and the system he represented. There was fear, certainly, but also an emerging awareness of accountability and the importance of correction. The man's journey that afternoon was not just about surviving an unjust encounter. It was about transforming it into an opportunity for awareness and change. As he returned to his home, still flanked by officers, he thought about the conversations that would follow, the investigations that would be launched, and the dialogue he would have with policymakers and law enforcement officials. His experience was personal, but the implications were universal, touching on issues of justice, equality, and the responsibility of those in positions of authority to act with fairness and awareness. By the time evening fell and the city lights flickered on, the story had already begun to take root in public consciousness. People talked about it in cafes, on subways, and in offices. Videos circulated widely, accompanied by discussions about bias, authority, and respect. The man, although shaken by the incident, maintained his focus on constructive action. He knew that responding with composure, clarity, and advocacy would have far more impact than reacting with anger or indignation. This was an opportunity to highlight systemic issues and advocate for meaningful reform. That night, he reflected on the fragility of perception and the danger of assumptions. A single moment of bias had escalated into a situation that could have ended tragically, yet his restraint and clarity had prevented further harm. The incident underscored the need for vigilance, empathy, and ongoing dialogue between law enforcement and the communities they serve. It was a stark reminder that dignity, composure, and principled action could transform moments of injustice into catalysts for change. As sleep finally came, it was accompanied not by bitterness or resentment, but by determination. Determination to ensure that what happened to him would not be forgotten, to work toward a society where assumptions and bias did not dictate actions, and to remind everyone involved, officials, civilians, and the public alike, that humanity, respect, and accountability must remain at the forefront of every interaction. The next day would bring official reports, media coverage, and the beginning of broader conversations. But in that quiet moment before dawn, the man's resolve was unwavering, a quiet yet powerful commitment to justice and change. The next morning, the city was alive with discussions about the previous day's incident. News stations ran clips over and over, highlighting the moment the officer had used the stun gun. Social media platforms were buzzing with outrage and concern. Every post, tweet, and comment seemed to carry the same mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. People could not understand how such an incident could happen to someone who had done nothing wrong. The man's calm response had been captured on video, and that too became a topic of discussion. Many were impressed by his restraint and the dignity with which he handled the situation. Reporters arrived at the man's office, eager to get an official statement. Camera crews set up, microphones were handed out, and questions were asked in rapid succession. The man, now aware that the incident had gone public and gone viral within hours, prepared himself to speak carefully. He knew that every word he spoke could influence public opinion and shape the discourse about justice, fairness, and systemic reform. He stood before the cameras and explained what had happened. His tone was calm, deliberate, and respectful. He shared the facts of the encounter, emphasizing that he had done nothing to provoke the officer and that he had been stunned without cause. Yet he did not dwell on personal hurt. Instead, he focused on the broader implications: the need to address bias, the importance of police training, and the responsibility to prevent such incidents from happening again. His statement was firm but measured, demonstrating leadership even in the face of personal injustice. Across the city, people reacted in different ways. Some were angry and demanded immediate accountability for the officer. They organized small gatherings outside the police station, holding signs and chanting for justice. Others wrote op-eds discussing the intersection of race, authority, and systemic bias. Social media feeds were flooded with videos of the incident, often accompanied by hashtags calling for reform. Civil rights organizations quickly released statements condemning the use of unnecessary force and emphasizing the importance of fair treatment for all citizens, regardless of race or position. Within government offices, the incident sparked conversations that reached the highest levels. Leaders were concerned about the implications not only politically but socially. Advisors discussed the need for swift action, proper investigation, and reassurance to the public that the situation would be handled with transparency and justice. Officials recognized that the incident could easily inflame tensions and sought to manage it carefully, balancing legal considerations with public sentiment. The officer involved was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. His colleagues, some sympathetic, some critical, spoke quietly among themselves about what had happened. They discussed the pressures of the job, the risks involved, and the importance of following proper protocol. At the same time, many could not ignore the reality. An innocent man had been hurt due to a mix of fear, bias, and misjudgment. The man himself continued with his work, though the incident weighed on him. Every interaction, every step he took reminded him of the fragility of perception and the danger of assumptions. He knew that his role required him to be patient, composed, and focused, and he tried to balance his personal feelings with his professional responsibilities. Meetings, briefings, and consultations filled his day, but the incident remained present in his mind as a powerful reminder of why systemic change was necessary. Meanwhile, the public reaction continued to grow. Influential voices in the media analyzed the event, often replaying the footage and discussing the societal implications. Commentators spoke about racial bias in policing, the importance of accountability, and the need for reform. They highlighted the man's calm response as an example of how dignity and restraint can guide actions in difficult situations. Interviews were conducted with legal experts, civil rights activists, and community leaders, all weighing in on what this incident revealed about systemic problems and how they might be addressed. In neighborhoods across the city, people gathered to talk about the incident. They shared their own experiences and fears, discussing how often similar situations might occur but go unnoticed. Stories emerged of encounters that were never reported, of people who felt powerless in the face of authority, and of communities that lived with a constant tension between trust and caution. The incident became a focal point for conversation, reflection, and advocacy, connecting personal experience to broader societal issues. The man received messages of support from colleagues, friends, and even strangers. Many expressed admiration for his composure and the way he handled the situation. Others offered assistance in navigating the media attention and the ongoing investigation. While the support was comforting, it also reminded him of the responsibility he bore. His reaction would set an example, and he had to ensure that it contributed to meaningful change rather than being reduced to a viral moment. Within the police department, internal discussions intensified. Supervisors reviewed the video footage, spoke with witnesses, and analyzed the officers' actions. Training programs were evaluated, and questions were raised about the culture within the force. There was recognition that this incident could not be brushed aside, that it represented a failure in judgment and adherence to protocol. The department faced pressure to demonstrate accountability and to implement measures that could prevent similar incidents in the future. The media storm did not just stay within the city. National news outlets picked up the story, framing it as both a racial injustice case and a political incident. Analysts debated the balance between personal responsibility and systemic failure. Discussions about law enforcement, bias, and accountability reached a wider audience, sparking conversation and debate across states and communities. The incident became more than a local event. It became a symbol of larger societal issues. The man, despite being at the center of the controversy, remained grounded. He spent time reflecting on what had happened, considering how best to use his experience to advocate for positive change. He met with advisors, policymakers, and community leaders, discussing the incident not as a personal grievance but as a learning moment for everyone involved. His focus was on creating opportunities for reform, highlighting the need for awareness, and promoting dialogue between law enforcement and the public. Every evening, as he reviewed the day's news coverage and social media reactions, he was reminded of the magnitude of the situation. The incident had sparked outrage, reflection, and conversation. People were talking about bias, authority, and justice in ways they had not before. It was clear that this event would have lasting effects, both on public perception and on the ongoing discourse about policing and fairness. As the days progressed, the media continued to follow the story closely. New interviews were conducted, follow-up analyses were published, and debates aired on television and radio. Public interest remained high, fueled by the compelling mix of shock, empathy, and concern for justice. The man's calm, reasoned approach became a key part of the narrative, offering a contrast to the outrage and anger that naturally accompanied the incident. Community organizations used the incident as a catalyst for action. Workshops, meetings, and discussions were organized to address bias, training, and communication between law enforcement and civilians. The incident became a learning moment, a case study in the importance of empathy, awareness, and accountability. It sparked a series of initiatives aimed at preventing similar occurrences and fostering understanding between authorities and the communities they serve. Throughout the media storm, the man remained focused on the principles that guided his response: dignity, restraint, and the pursuit of justice. He continued to work, to advise, and to engage with leaders and communities. His experience became a touchstone for conversations about fairness, bias, and the responsibility of those in positions of power to act thoughtfully and ethically. Despite the personal shock and public scrutiny, he remained committed to turning a painful moment into an opportunity for positive change. The officer, meanwhile, faced intense scrutiny and pressure. Internal investigations continued, and discussions about disciplinary action and retraining took place. The incident became a central example of the consequences of bias and misjudgment, both within the department and in the public eye. He had to confront the reality of his actions and the ripple effects they caused, understanding that his decisions would be analyzed, debated, and remembered for a long time. By the end of the week, the incident had become a defining moment in public discourse. People continued to discuss, debate, and reflect on the events, their implications, and what lessons could be learned. The man's response remained a key focus, highlighting the importance of leadership, composure, and ethical action in the face of injustice. The city, and indeed the nation, had been reminded of the fragility of trust, the consequences of bias, and the potential for change when incidents are addressed thoughtfully and responsibly. Through all the attention, the man remained committed to a balanced and human-centered perspective. He engaged with the media, policymakers, and communities, emphasizing the importance of systemic reform and mutual understanding. He encouraged dialogue, reflection, and constructive action, transforming a moment of personal injustice into a catalyst for broader awareness and societal progress. The media storm, intense as it was, became a platform for meaningful conversation, illuminating issues that had long been overlooked or ignored and demonstrating the power of measured, principled responses to even the most challenging situations. The morning after the incident, the police department was filled with a tense atmosphere. Officers and supervisors moved quietly through the hallways, speaking in hushed tones. The video of the stun gun incident had gone viral, and the public's attention was focused sharply on how the department would respond. Internal memos circulated quickly, and meetings were scheduled to review every detail. The officer involved had been placed on administrative leave, but the investigation was just beginning. Senior officials understood that the situation demanded transparency and accountability. They reviewed the video footage, analyzed the statements of witnesses, and considered the context of the officer's behavior. Every aspect of the encounter was scrutinized. Discussions were careful, deliberate, and thorough. The leadership wanted to ensure that their actions would not only be legally sound, but also publicly responsible. They knew that the city and the nation were watching. The officer who had used the stun gun was struggling to come to terms with what had happened. Alone in an office, he replayed the moment over and over in his mind. Fear, shame, and regret washed over him. He knew he had acted too quickly, letting assumptions and bias guide his decisions instead of following proper protocol. He reflected on his training, on the responsibility that came with his badge, and on the trust the public had placed in him. The weight of his actions was heavy, and he realized that he could not undo what had been done, only face it and accept responsibility. The man who had been stunned continued his work, but the incident lingered in his thoughts. He knew that while he had been personally affected, the larger issue was systemic. He spent time consulting with advisors and community leaders, thinking carefully about how to address the situation in a way that promoted accountability and reform. His goal was not vengeance but justice, and he understood that his calm and measured approach could influence both the investigation and public opinion. Internal meetings in the police department were intense. Supervisors spoke to officers about the incident, discussing how situations like these could escalate and how they could be prevented in the future. Training procedures were re-examined, and discussions about bias, communication, and restraint were emphasized. The leadership knew that the officer's mistake was not just a personal failure, but also a reflection of the broader challenges within law enforcement. They faced the difficult task of balancing accountability with support for their team, while also maintaining public trust. Investigators conducted interviews with witnesses, the officer and the man involved. Each account was carefully documented. Witnesses described the shock and confusion they had felt, the sudden escalation of the encounter, and the visible restraint the man had shown despite being stunned. The investigation aimed to be thorough and impartial, examining not only what had happened but why it had happened, patterns of behavior, Prior complaints and training records were all reviewed to ensure a comprehensive understanding of the event. As the investigation progressed, discussions about potential disciplinary measures began. The leadership considered suspension, retraining, and other corrective actions. The officer faced the reality that his career could be profoundly affected. He had to confront the personal and professional consequences of his actions. At the same time, the department wanted to make sure that the response would serve as a learning opportunity, emphasizing the importance of protocol, awareness, and respect for all members of the community. Meanwhile, the man involved continued to engage with the broader community. He met with civil rights organizations, community leaders, and media representatives to discuss what had happened and what could be done to prevent similar incidents. His approach was consistent and measured, focusing on education, awareness, and systemic change rather than personal grievance. His calm demeanor and thoughtful words earned him respect and helped guide the conversation in a constructive direction. The officer, too, began to reflect deeply on his actions. He recognized the influence of implicit bias and the dangers of acting too quickly in stressful situations. He spent long hours thinking about how he could improve, how he could regain trust, and how he could prevent future mistakes. Counseling and retraining sessions were scheduled, focusing on empathy, communication, and proper use of force. The process was challenging, but it provided an opportunity for personal growth and professional development. Throughout the investigation, communication with the public was carefully managed. Press releases were issued, explaining the steps being taken to review the incident, hold the officer accountable, and ensure that policies and training were being examined and improved. Transparency was emphasized to rebuild public trust, showing that the department was taking the incident seriously and was committed to fairness and justice. The community continued to respond. People attended town hall meetings, shared their experiences, and voiced their concerns about bias and accountability in law enforcement. Conversations focused on the need for change, the importance of trust between police and civilians, and strategies to prevent similar incidents. Workshops and training sessions were organized, emphasizing communication, restraint, and awareness. The incident became a learning moment, not just for the officer involved, but for the department and the broader community. In the office of the man who had been stunned, discussions continued about the wider implications of the event. He emphasized the importance of using the incident as an opportunity to educate and reform, to turn a moment of personal injustice into a catalyst for systemic improvement. His focus was on the long-term impact, improving policies, promoting awareness, and building bridges between law enforcement and the communities they serve. The investigation also included an examination of similar past incidents. Patterns were identified, highlighting areas where training and oversight could be improved. Discussions about accountability, cultural awareness, and procedural standards were central to these reviews. Leadership recognized that preventing future incidents required more than punishment. It required education, self-awareness, and systemic reform. The officer faced a series of meetings with supervisors and investigators. He answered questions about his actions, explained his thought process, and acknowledged the mistakes he had made. Each meeting was a step in the process of accountability, forcing him to confront the consequences of his actions and consider how to improve. The experience was humbling and difficult, but it also offered an opportunity for reflection and growth. As the days passed, the department began implementing additional training and awareness programs. Officers participated in workshops on bias, communication, and decision-making under stress. Role-playing exercises were conducted to simulate real-life scenarios, emphasizing restraint, observation, and proper protocol. Leadership communicated the importance of empathy and understanding, highlighting the need to treat all civilians with respect and dignity. The man who had been stunned continued to engage with the media and community leaders, ensuring that the narrative remained centered on constructive change rather than sensationalism. He emphasized that the incident, while personal, was part of a larger conversation about fairness, equity, and the importance of systemic reform. His calm, reasoned approach helped guide public discourse and encouraged meaningful dialogue. Throughout the city, discussions about the incident remained vibrant. Residents spoke about their experiences, shared concerns about law enforcement, and explored solutions to improve community relations. The event became a focal point for education, advocacy, and policy development. It demonstrated that even in moments of personal adversity, leadership, composure, and principled action could influence broader societal change. By the end of the investigation, clear steps had been outlined. The officer faced disciplinary action and retraining, while the department implemented new policies and enhanced training programs. The incident served as a case study, highlighting the importance of awareness, communication, and ethical behavior. Both the man and the officer had learned valuable lessons, and the community had engaged in critical conversations about justice, fairness, and accountability. In private moments, the man reflected on the incident and its broader implications. He recognized the power of composure, the impact of measured responses, and the importance of addressing systemic issues with patience and clarity. The officer, too, reflected on his actions and the consequences, acknowledging the need for personal growth, awareness, and a renewed commitment to ethical conduct. Together, their experiences became part of a larger story, a story about accountability, reflection, and the potential for change in the face of adversity. The investigation concluded with a clear message. Mistakes have consequences, but they can also inspire learning and reform. The department, the officer, and the community had all been affected, and the incident would serve as a reminder of the importance of fairness, empathy, and the constant pursuit of improvement. The city moved forward, but the lessons of that day remained, influencing policy, training, and the relationships between law enforcement and the public in lasting ways. After weeks of investigation, public discussion, and internal review, the city finally began to see a resolution to the incident that had captured so much attention. The officer who had used the stun gun faced disciplinary measures, which included mandatory retraining, suspension, and community service. He had to confront the gravity of his actions fully, understanding the physical, emotional, and societal consequences of his behavior. While the measures were difficult, they served as a clear reminder to everyone in the department about the importance of restraint, awareness, and accountability. The man who had been stunned returned to his work with renewed determination. He had endured an unjust experience, yet he chose to focus on the lessons it offered rather than the personal pain. He continued to meet with policymakers, community leaders, and law enforcement officials to advocate for systemic reform. His message remained consistent. Accountability, empathy, and fair treatment must be at the heart of every interaction between law enforcement and the public. Through his efforts, the incident became more than a moment of personal injustice. It became a catalyst for meaningful change. Community engagement increased in response to the incident. Workshops, seminars, and meetings were organized to discuss the importance of bias awareness, proper training, and respectful treatment of all individuals. Residents shared personal experiences and listened to stories from others, creating a space for understanding and dialogue. The incident had sparked a larger conversation about justice, fairness, and equality, one that extended far beyond the initial encounter on the street. The officer involved spent much of his time in reflection and retraining. He worked closely with supervisors, counselors, and trainers to understand the errors in his judgment and the influence of unconscious bias. He learned the importance of taking a moment to assess situations fully, of recognizing the humanity of every individual, and of adhering strictly to proper protocol. Though challenging, this process allowed him to grow both personally and professionally, ensuring that his future interactions would be guided by empathy and responsibility. Media coverage gradually shifted from immediate outrage to analysis and reflection. Journalists, commentators, and analysts focused on the lessons that could be drawn from the incident. Discussions highlighted how individual actions are part of broader systemic issues, and how proactive measures, education, and accountability can prevent similar situations. The man's calm and dignified response remained a central point, illustrating the power of composure and principled action in the face of injustice. The city's leadership also took steps to implement long-term changes. Policies were updated to emphasize accountability, transparency, and community engagement. Law enforcement officers received enhanced training on bias awareness, conflict resolution, and communication. Community liaison programs were strengthened, aiming to build trust and understanding between residents and officers. The incident, while regrettable, had sparked a constructive movement toward systemic improvement. For the man, the experience reinforced the importance of leadership under pressure. He continued to balance his professional responsibilities with public advocacy, demonstrating how a measured and thoughtful approach can influence positive outcomes. He met regularly with community leaders and law enforcement officials to discuss ongoing strategies for reform, emphasizing the need for dialogue, empathy, and mutual understanding. His efforts highlighted that addressing systemic issues requires not only policy changes, but also a commitment to fostering awareness and respect. In personal reflection, he recognized the resilience required to face public scrutiny, physical pain, and emotional stress while maintaining dignity. He thought about how the incident could serve as a learning moment for everyone involved, including the officer, the department, and the broader community. By focusing on constructive action, he transformed a moment of injustice into a long-term opportunity for growth and reform. The officer, too, experienced a profound transformation. He recognized the human cost of his actions and the necessity of examining his own biases and judgments. Through retraining and counseling, he developed a deeper understanding of empathy, respect, and professionalism. The experience, while humbling, allowed him to approach his duties with renewed awareness and commitment to ethical conduct. He became an example within the department of how mistakes, when acknowledged and addressed, can lead to personal and systemic improvement. Public discussions about the incident continued in schools, workplaces, and community centers. Educators used the case to teach lessons about bias, fairness, and the importance of standing up for justice. Community leaders emphasized how a single event could illuminate broader societal challenges and inspire collective action. The narrative shifted from one of anger to one of reflection, learning, and the pursuit of constructive solutions. The man maintained a balance between addressing the incident and continuing his professional work. He met with colleagues, participated in strategic planning sessions, and offered advice on policy matters. His ability to navigate both public scrutiny and professional responsibilities highlighted the importance of composure, strategic thinking, and principled action. Through his leadership, the incident became a reference point for discussions about ethics, responsibility, and social awareness. The officer's reintegration into the department was carefully managed. He participated in team-building exercises, ongoing training, and mentorship programs. His experience was used to educate others about the consequences of hasty actions and the value of careful judgment. Over time, he regained trust from some colleagues and began to rebuild his professional identity. The process was gradual, emphasizing accountability, reflection, and the need for continuous learning. Community reactions continued to evolve. While initial anger and outrage were strong, public sentiment shifted toward support for reform and constructive dialogue. People recognized the value of learning from mistakes, addressing systemic issues, and promoting understanding. The incident served as a catalyst for conversations about fairness, ethics, and the responsibilities of those in authority, fostering a culture of accountability and empathy. In private, the man reflected on how a single incident could resonate across a city and even a nation. He thought about the importance of remaining calm under pressure, of using personal experiences to advocate for systemic change, and of focusing on solutions rather than blame. He recognized that leadership is often demonstrated in moments of adversity, and that principled action can inspire others to think critically about justice and fairness. The officer, having faced the consequences of his actions, also reflected on his responsibilities. He considered how to apply the lessons he had learned to future encounters, how to approach his work with renewed awareness, and how to contribute positively to the department and the community. His journey was one of growth, humility, and an acknowledgement of the need for continuous self-improvement. By the time the incident faded from the immediate headlines, its effects had already taken root in policy, training, and community engagement. The man's efforts had ensured that the conversation extended beyond personal experience, addressing systemic issues and promoting constructive reform. The officer's accountability and retraining demonstrated the importance of personal responsibility and the potential for growth even after serious mistakes. The city itself benefited from the incident through increased awareness, improved communication between law enforcement and the public, and the implementation of reforms designed to prevent similar occurrences. Workshops, training sessions, and community programs continued to emphasize empathy, fairness, and accountability, ensuring that the lessons of the incident would have a lasting impact. In the end, the incident became a story not just of personal injustice, but of resilience, leadership, and the pursuit of positive change. The man's calm, principled response, combined with systemic reforms and personal accountability, transformed a troubling event into a moment of learning and growth. Both the man and the officer carried the lessons forward, each in their own way, contributing to a broader understanding of justice, fairness, and human dignity. The community, too, carried the lessons, fostering dialogue, awareness, and a commitment to building a more just and equitable society. The story served as a powerful reminder that even in moments of adversity, principled action and thoughtful reflection can lead to meaningful change for individuals and communities alike.